Welcome to this edition of Footprints in American History. Today, we're going to talk about Casablanca. Not just Casablanca the movie, but Casablanca the conference. Now, I recently went to see Casablanca in the theaters. They were celebrating the 80th anniversary of the film's release. So, being a big movie buff, especially old movies like Casablanca, I had to go see it. And this was definitely a movie that was set in the 1940s. It had an all-star cast to it. Paul Henright as Victor Laszlo, Ingrid Bergman as Ilsa, Rick Blaine, Humphrey Bogart, the saloon owner, Claude Rains, Peter Lorre, Sidney Greenstreet. So there was a lot of people in this movie that were famous. Now, when this movie was made, World War II had just begun. The attack on with the Japanese on Pearl Harbor had just taken place about a year before, so the United States is still reeling a little bit from what happened of suddenly being dragged into this war unexpectedly. So now what's happening is they've got to get their ideas together of like, how are we going to win this war? Because they realized this is very serious. They're getting hit by the Japanese on the Pacific. They're having to deal with the Germans as well as the Italians. So this was a very big concern because they knew that there was a lot at stake. Now, what happened was, this movie was being made, it was finished in the summer of 1942. They didn't plan to release it until the spring of 1943. Now, what happened, though, was there was Operation Torch. This was taking place in North Africa, and they actually bombed the city of Casablanca during this campaign with the Allies. Now, what was going on, though, was with the movie, they're getting it ready to release it. They realized, okay, we've got to work faster. And they were even told by the studios, work faster and get this movie released. The reason for that was because they saw what was coming up as far as the war was going. Now, what was happening was that very few Americans knew where Casablanca was. So they were kind of worried about how are we going to market this movie. However, what happened was, by a stroke of luck, Operation Torch is going on, and there's something coming up called the Casablanca Conference. So they met with FDR, gave him a private screening at the White House of Casablanca, and what they wanted to do was release this movie, and what happened was they did. They released it instead of the spring, they released it in January of 1943, just before the Casablanca Conference met. Now, the Casablanca Conference took place in the city of Casablanca, and many world leaders met there to discuss about invading Europe. Now, at this point, Nazi Germany had swept through France, they had swept through all these other countries. They had also got right up to the doors of Moscow almost during the winter. So, excuse me, so what happened was they're having to figure out how are we going to be able to stop this advance of these people, because they are really putting it to the test, not to mention what the Japanese were doing over in Asia. So it was a very, very major concern. Now, with the Casablanca Conference, it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, Charles de Gaulle, several other smaller leaders. In addition to that, Stalin was planning to attend it, but they were in the middle of a major offensive against the Germans, and he let them know, we're not able to make it. So they met in Casablanca for a period of 10 days, and the purpose of this Casablanca Conference was to discuss how were they going to invade Europe. They realized right now Germany is on the offensive, and they realized there's a lot at stake, there's a lot that could be lost, but they also know that they've got to get organized. Now, they're already starting to see success with Operation Torch in North Africa, but there's still a long ways to go. And they have to invade Europe. They know at some point they're going to have to. And they also realize, though, that if they don't plan this right, they could lose the war. And the United States did not want to do that. The U.S. was still just getting organized. They had lost a big part of the Pacific fleet at Pearl Harbor just barely a year before. We were fortunate in that case because our carriers were out at sea when they attacked. However, we still had to worry about Germany. So there was a lot of concern about how were we going to do this. So the purpose of this was to sit down with each other, discuss strategies of how to get Germany under control and to be able to win this war. Now, one thing that did come into agreement as far as Churchill and Roosevelt was they realized we need to talk to Germany when we win this war and tell them unconditional surrender. In other words, unconditional, no conditions whatsoever. So they made that clear because they wanted to avoid any post-war problems that could arise once this war was over. And they had no idea at that time just how much sacrifice it was going to take. Now with the movie Casablanca, you have Rick, who's played by Humphrey Bogart. He had fought fascists in Spain. You have Victor Laszlo, who is Ingrid Bergman's lover, also in this movie, played by Paul Henrod. His name, he went by Victor Laszlo in the movie. He was fighting the Nazis already. He was part of the resistance. So that was a big part of what this movie was about, was getting them to safety. Casablanca was under the threat of Nazi Germany in the movie. So it was perfect timing for the release of this movie, because all of a sudden the Casablanca Conference was all over the news. And because of it, it became a perfect marketing thing. They were worried about being able to market it before. Suddenly here it is all over the news. A movie is released, which won, by the way, several awards. So as a result, Casablanca became known as one of the greatest movies of all time. And because of this conference, it got all the free advertising that they could have never dreamed of getting. In the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like and share the video. Also subscribe to the channel, ring the bell if you want notifications of future videos. Also, check out our Footprints in American History Facebook page. And if you haven't seen my other channel, it's called Just a Bit Outside. Please take a look at it. I think you'll enjoy the videos on there as well. In the meantime, fair winds and following seas.
just a bit outside.